In this episode, we will present an overview of the student record. To view a student record, first you need to have at least one record in your database. So, let's create a test record. First, navigate to the Records icon. This is where you can look up the list of records in your database, as well as create a new person record. From there, click the New Person button. Here, we're presented with the minimum amount of information necessary in order to create a new person record in Slate: email, first name, last name, and date of birth. This is a good time to stop and go into a bit more detail about the importance of these four fields. The importance of these data points cannot be overstated. Slate uses a combination of email, first, last, and date of birth to ensure that records match appropriately when a form is submitted, an application is created, or data is imported. These data points, among others, are also used to identify possible duplicate records that might exist within your database. Upon form submission or dataset import, Slate uses the following criteria to determine if data being imported matches an existing record or if a new record should be created: first name, last name, and email address, or first name, last name, and date of birth. Therefore, it is always a good idea to include these data points on any public-facing form you might create, an inquiry form, for example, or an event registration. Any form that, upon submission, has the ability to create a new record or match on an existing record within Slate should have these four fields on it. This will ensure the highest level of accuracy when it comes to either creating a new record or matching on an existing record in Slate, and will ultimately lead to fewer duplicate records within your database. Okay, now let's actually create a new record. For your test applicant, use your actual email address. This will come in handy later when you're testing the functionality of forms and other things you create in Slate. You can give your test applicant any name you wish. As a fan of U.S. history and Broadway theater, I'll use Alexander Hamilton. Now we'll click Create, and our test record will be created. Now, here's our new test record. You can see that the data points we entered have been saved, and they are now displaying on the Dashboard tab. Obviously, this particular record contains significantly more information than a brand new test record, but should prove more useful for the purposes of this discussion. The Dashboard tab is the default tab that appears when you bring up a student record. For the most part, the Dashboard tab displays data. This is not the tab to actually change these data points. We'll get to that in a minute. As more data is entered about the student, including address, phone, citizenship, etc., this data will automatically populate on the Dashboard tab. You'll also see that Alexander's photo has automatically appeared. This is because I have associated his email address with this image through Gravatar, a globally recognized avatar image service. What this means is that if a student has a Gravatar associated with their email address, the image will automatically be pulled in. This functionality is enabled by default. However, it is possible to disable the display of Gravatars on the Dashboard tab for all records. You can configure this in the Database Configuration Keys tool. Okay, let's move on to the next Slate Standard tab, the Timeline tab. The Timeline tab will display a chronological list of interactions, including form submissions, messages sent to the student, etc. The Timeline tab is meant to provide a quick, at-a-glance graphical representation of a student's activities over time. As you can see, it's very easy in this view to see that the student first came into the database in 2014, has had the most interactions in the latter half of 2015, and the majority of those interactions have occurred in June and October of 2015. Now let's take a look at the Interactions subtab. The Interactions page is a subtab of the Timeline tab. The Interactions page allows for a more granular and custom approach to viewing interactions. The types of interactions can be clicked on and off. For example, messages or emails, sources such as form and event registrations, dataset imports, etc., and interaction codes organized by parent code. It is also possible to search for interactions here, useful if a student has a long list. Now, if we click on a particular interaction, we'll see that it will bring up more information about that interaction. In this example of an event registration, we could also click on the subject and be taken to that event in Slate. More on that later. Lastly, we'll check out the Audit Log subtab. The audit log tracks changes and updates that have occurred to this record within Slate. For example, if a field was updated, if a record was accessed by a Slate user, or if a person or application was created, etc., etc. As you can see, the audit log reflects first that the person was created, and most recently, that I have accessed the record. There are a few more entries related to fields being set, person status and student type. We'll learn more about how this happens a bit later when we get to the rules editor. But this is a great place to check if something happens to a student and you don't know why, or if you want to trace back exactly what was set when and by whom. Now, let's move on to the Profile tab. The Overview section resembles the Dashboard tab we just saw. It will be an overview of data points that can be entered or updated on other tabs. What's the difference between the Dashboard and the Profile Overview tab, you might ask? While not readily apparent on this test record, when a student has an application, some of that application data will be displayed on the Dashboard tab. The Profile Overview tab will always display data specific to the person, data that is entered on one of these subtabs here below. The Biographical subtab is the first section where we are introduced to some Slate standard fields. Slate standard fields are fields that already exist within Slate and are designed for a specific purpose. They are often fields that function in special and unique ways, i.e., as we learned about how name, email, and date of birth function in record matching and duplicate resolution. And therefore, their field IDs cannot be changed, and their properties, for the most part, cannot be modified. It is worth noting that rarely should you find yourself needing to enter data about a student manually through these fields, though it is possible to update the data here when changes are necessary. However, for the most part, this type of biodemo and other profile data will automatically populate in these fields through the submission of forms, an application, or other data file imports. When you're making changes to any of these fields, be sure to click the Save button. Now, let's move on to the Contact Address tab. This tab is where email addresses, phone numbers, and mailing addresses are stored. Email and phone data is stored in the Contact section, also known as the Device table, and mailing addresses are stored in the Address section. Let's click Insert Address and give Alexander Hamilton a mailing address. Note that we can choose to set this address as either a mailing or permanent address with a priority level as well. We'll come back to priority in just a second. We could also set valid from and until dates for an address if it is a mailing address. Now that we've entered his address, let's click Save. Uh-oh, it looks like I might have forgotten an important part of our address. You'll see that any time you try and enter an address for a student into Slate, either through the Profile tab or on a form or application, we automatically check it against USPS validation. I'll go back and enter our floor number, which is a necessary part of the mailing address, by clicking Fix Address. Now I've entered a valid address. And before saving this, I also want to enter a phone number for my test applicant. I'll click Add Contact and change the type to Primary Phone. I can also choose a priority here. Typically, Normal is the appropriate priority to choose. However, there will be cases when you want a certain phone or email address to be the high priority contact. This will ensure it is used for email communications to the student and can otherwise indicate to your staff the preferred method of communication. The priority is typically set to Normal for an email address, mailing, or permanent address that is imported from an inquiry form or dataset upload. Data imported from an application, however, could be set to have a priority of High. This is a great way to ensure that you are ranking the most reliable information in the #1 spot. Note that you can also assign a device or address a priority of Inactive. This is a great alternative to deleting, especially where email addresses are concerned. For example, if an email address is inactivated, the history of messages sent to that address will remain on the Interactions tab. This may not be the case if the email address were deleted. One other important thing to note. I can store multiple emails, phone numbers, and addresses on any given record. In fact, I could have dozens, though that's unlikely. Slate makes it easy to organize and make sense of data that is imported from a variety of sources, and the way that this data is stored ensures that the email addresses from an application are not overwritten by old email addresses from a test score import, for example. To add multiple of any type of contact or address, just click Add Contact or Add Address again. Okay, now that we've updated these data points for Alexander Hamilton, let's click Save. After clicking Save, I've returned to the Overview tab, and you can see that new information is now appearing based on the data I just entered. I now have an address, as well as a map of my location that is automatically generated and a phone number listed below my email address. Now, let's move on to the Relationships tab. The Relationships tab functions similarly to the Contact Address tab. I can store multiple relationship records, and Slate does not strictly limit the number or type of relationships that can exist. As you'll see from the window that pops up when you click New Relationship, many data points can be entered about each relationship. Slate includes many standard fields by default, including relationship type, name, email, etc. However, it is possible to add your own custom relationship fields if that is important to your process. Here's an important note. In order for a relationship record to be created and saved, type, first name, and last name are required. This means that a relationship record cannot just be created with an email address only. Many schools create custom non-relationship fields for data points such as parent email address if this is a question that is asked early on in the inquiry process, such as on an inquiry form, so that the data can be captured and utilized for marketing or other outreach purposes. When the application is submitted, this is a great time to capture all of the relationship data points: type, name, email, education level, address, etc. Often, a successful use of parent information utilizes both custom fields and the Relationships tab, depending on where the student is in the process, i.e. inquiry versus an applicant. Now, let's move on to the Schools tab. The Schools tab functions similarly to the Relationships tab, in that Slate is capable of storing multiple school records associated with one student record. If you type in the name or SEEB number of a school, you'll see that Slate gives you a list of possible matches, and then fills in the information associated with that school. The organizations that appear in this list come pre-delivered with your Slate instance. There are over 50,000. However, you can customize, update, and maintain this list as you see fit moving forward. We refer to these institutions as the organization's dataset. More on that later. In addition to SEEB, name, and location info, there are a lot of other data points specific to a particular school record that can be utilized here. These include data points such as attendance dates, level of study, major, GPA information, etc. It is also possible to create custom school scope fields specific to your needs. These will display below the standard school fields on a school record. Now, let's move on to the Scores tab. Are you starting to sense a pattern here? Similar to contacts, addresses, relationships, and schools, Slate gives you the ability to store multiple test scores for a single student. In fact, you can customize the list of possible test types from which to choose when adding a score to a student record so that the score types available are relevant for your school and your process. E.g., a graduate program may not care for the SATs, whereas an undergraduate school may not wish to see the GRE score type as an option. These test types can be added from the Slate template library. A few things to keep in mind here. Slate tries to keep things organized for you by eliminating duplicate scores, as well as tracking if a score is self-reported or verified. For example, if a student indicates their SAT score while filling out your application, this score gets added here at a self-reported status. If an official test score later comes in from the College Board through a dataset upload that matches the score type, date, and values, then the existing score will be updated to be verified. When filtering, exporting, and otherwise managing scores in Slate, you can always choose whether you are looking at self-reported and verified scores, or just verified scores. Okay, let's move on to some of the other tabs still to go on our list. Okay, we're going to pause here for a minute. We're going to move quickly through each one of these other tabs since they are similar to ones we've already discussed from a functional perspective, and they are used less frequently in the beginning of an implementation. Additionally, if there is a tab that you plan not to use at all, perhaps the Sports tab if you are a graduate or professional school, it is possible to deactivate it and hide it from your users, so it's not cluttering up the student record interface unnecessarily. We'll learn how to do this a little later. The Jobs tab is useful for exactly what it sounds like, storing jobs data. Like the Schools tab, many standard fields are available, and custom job scope fields can also be created. The Courses tab scores information about specific courses a student has taken, including course name, number, subject, etc. Note that a course must be associated with a school. This means that in order to enter course data, a school must already be entered on the Schools tab. This is because course data is school-specific. Courses are always associated with an institution. The Interest tab stores data points related to a student's interests or activities. Specifically, it stores information about those activities beyond just what they are. For example, you can store activity type, name, frequency, location, and other standard and custom details. It's important to note that the Interest tab is not the best place to store an interest list for a student. For example, a question like, "What are your academic interests?" will be better asked on an inquiry form with a single question and a long list of possible prompt option responses. This would be a custom multi-value field with a custom prompt list. The Interests tab is typically utilized once an application is submitted, since that is the typical location where a student indicates a full list of their activity interests, including dates and frequency of participation and other detailed information. The Sports tab is typically used by schools whose admissions offices are working with athletic coaches to recruit student athletes. For example, there is a standard source format that allows data from FrontRush to be imported to the Slate Sports tab. Each sport entry can contain information about the sport and position played, as well as custom information like rating and coach notes. Similar to the Interest tab, the Sports tab is not the best place to store a single list of all the students' possible athletic interests. This kind of question is better asked through a multi-value field with a custom prompt list, like we just discussed. It is only at the point where additional information about a given interest in a sport becomes available or needed, such as a position and rating, that storing this more detailed information on the Sports tab becomes necessary. The Account tab includes information specific to a student's Slate account. This includes the email address that they use to log into their application and/or the application status page, as well as their single-use PIN number if a password has yet to be established. The email address in this field will automatically be the Rank 1 email address from the Contact Address tab. The PIN number is needed for the student to create an account in Slate, to either start or log in to their existing application. The PIN number will be automatically generated and is only needed again if the student needs to reset their password. The delete option is just as it sounds. It deletes the student's record from Slate and all of their associated data. This is not a common practice. There are other ways to opt a student out of receiving information if they are no longer interested or if they are denied to your program. It is often important to not delete actual student records for reporting and other purposes. The merge option is useful if you have two records in Slate for the same person. There are many reasons why this may and will occur, and duplicate resolution is one of those ongoing chores of managing a student record database. Slate tries to make things as easy as possible, however, and we will go into more depth about merging and consolidating records later. While the majority of merging will occur through that tool specifically, sometimes it can be useful to specifically merge a record into another one that you choose. Now let's move on to some of the other options available on the Profile tab. Create Application is a great tool for creating sample applications for your test record. It's not possible to create an application until you've actually defined your application period and round structure, however, so we'll come back to this at a later chapter. Keep in mind that for real applicants, their applications will almost always be created in another way, when they start the application online, or by submitting a particular form, or if their application is created through a data import, such as the Common Application. Briefly, Restore Application is just as it sounds. If an application is deleted from a student record, we do keep a backup of it just in case. So if an application was deleted accidentally, it is possible to restore it through this feature. Edit Slate ID is an option that you will rarely utilize. The Slate ID is the 9-digit number in the top right of the student record, and it is automatically generated by Slate when a record is created. While you can see here that it is possible to add an override ID, this is not recommended. Slate actually supports the ability to create custom, unique ID fields. What this means is that you could create a custom field for your SIS ID, such as a banner ID or PITM. This custom field would be where you would store this SIS ID when you set up data feeds from Slate to your student information system, and it will function as a unique ID, allowing record matching and identifying possible duplicates based on this ID. It is not a good idea to use your SIS ID as the override ID. The Edit Restricted Access option is a tool that gives granular permission control on a record-by-record basis. There are several permissions in Slate that allow you to show or hide groups of students to your users, such as only show students in the active application period, to prevent certain staff from seeing historical records. However, occasionally there are situations where you may want to restrict access to a particular record from a particular user or group of users. This can be useful for high-profile applicants, as well as applicants of current staff or family members. We'll learn more about the specifics of setting up custom permissions like this one a little bit later. Phew! We made it through the Profile tab. Okay, now let's move on to the last Slate Standard tab, the Materials tab. The Materials tab is used to store PDF or Word documents that a student may submit to your office. And crucially, this tab is available before an application is created for a student. This means that it is possible to store documents that arrive before an application is actually created or submitted, and subsequently have those documents available after the application comes in. Let's try uploading a material. After clicking New Material, you'll be presented with this pop-up. By default, the material will be loaded to the student's folio. The folio is the only destination available if the student has yet to start an application. Once an application has been started, there will be options for folio as well as each application. All items uploaded to the folio will be available to satisfy checklist items for any application that the student starts. Once we've chosen the destination, we can choose which type of material the document is that we are uploading. You can customize the list of materials that you would like to be able to see in this list in the database tool. A material type in Slate is essentially an electronic container for a particular type of document. It's important to create material names that are general, such as resume or teacher recommendation. You should not create material types for teacher recommendation 1, teacher recommendation 2, etc. It is possible to store more than one item of the same material on a student's record, however. Additionally, when importing documents in a batch way through some of Slate's other tools, it is impossible to know whether the teacher recommendation that is being imported is the first, the third, or the eighth of that material type. Therefore, the material names should be generic enough to accommodate this uncertainty. Rest assured that using Slate's checklist functionality, it will be very easy to track how many of a particular material have been submitted and satisfy checklist items accordingly. The memo field here can be used to enter admin notes about a particular material. Now, let's choose our document. Only PDFs and Word documents should be uploaded here. Now that we've uploaded our sample document, we're presented with a preview of the document's pages. It is possible to rotate certain pages of the document if necessary. Just click the Edit button in the bottom right hand of the pop-up. Here we have the ability to scroll through the pages of our uploaded document and rotate or delete pages if necessary. It's also possible to insert a document separator which will remove the following pages from the document. This can be useful if two documents were accidentally uploaded together. Note that documents that are removed in this manner are sent to the Batch Acquire tool, where they can be assigned to a different student or the same student under a different material type. Now that we're satisfied with how our document looks, let's click Save. Now that we've saved our sample material, we can see that it has been added to the Students Materials tab, along with the date it was imported. As additional materials are imported either manually or through an automated process, they will show up here. Let's pause for a moment here to discuss briefly the several ways that a material could be uploaded to a student's record in Slate. In a one-off way, administratively through the Materials tab, this is what we just did. In a one-off way, uploaded by the student through the status page or a material uploaded on a form. In a batch method, using the Batch Acquire functionality, you can scan in dozens or hundreds of documents at once, and then assign them to student records once they have been uploaded. This is a great option for paper documents that are scanned, though you can also add a PDF file that contains documents for many students and assign them individually as well. Option 4 is a automated document import. This is the Automagical method because documents are loaded through Slate's SFTP servers and automatically routed to the correct student records. This is the manner in which Common App PDF documents are imported. It is also possible to import custom batches of documents using a standard source format if a unique ID for the student and the material type of the document is known in advance. We'll cover this in more detail in a later chapter on Upload Dataset. And that's the student record. Keep in mind that you'll be able to customize the interface more and more as you build custom fields and learn in a future episode about custom tabs. Don't hesitate to submit a request to the student record category in the service desk if you ever have any questions specific to your particular process. Thanks for tuning in.